It's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Mr. Marvin Beatty, who has known the mayor in a number of ways and has brought his spirit into the fore in a number of different institutions and capacities in this town, to come to the stage and tell me, Marvin, Mr. Beatty. I'd like you to begin your story, if you would, with another word for power.
Power, a short word for a very challenging experience. Power is something that emanates from someplace deep inside of the human spirit. Power, to me, reflecting back on many, many years of the leadership of the Honorable Coleman Young, that is power. Good evening. Take a step back in time with me to 1970. 1970, I was just a young man in the city of Detroit who had a tremendous amount of ambition about what would I become and how do I become it. So I started out in 1970 on the line at Detroit Diesel, working my way, trying to figure out where this black man would go next. What was next for him? Well, I started on that line, and I worked a while, and I began to realize that things that were happening there were not necessarily inhumane, but not friendly to the African American community, not friendly to the people who were cranking out many, many blocks for diesel engines. But there wasn't the respect factor that I thought should exist in that experience. So I began to speak truth to power, if you will, to the leadership in that plant, to my line supervisor, and I would just say things like, that's irresponsible, that's disrespectful, that's more than you are asking others. Over time, the people that I work with began to feel the spirit of it all. And they thought, here this young guy is, unproven, but really believes that fairness and equity is part of our life's experience. And these guys, in many respects, had been there 15, 20, 25 years. But they were encouraging me as a young person who had no leadership skills, who didn't even know what leadership really was, but did know what respect was, and did realize that we were not getting what we needed. Moving on in time, several years later, 1972, I leave Detroit Diesel. But on my way out, the superintendent of the plant, who I had had many different exchanges with over time, said to me, as I indicated to him that I was leaving to join the Detroit Fire Department. He said to me, Marvin, you have taken on many different discussions in this plant, but I believe in my heart that you will not be successful at the Detroit Fire Department. I turned and I walked away. I went to the department, and after a couple years of activity in a very, very turbulent time, a time when nepotism ran rampant in the Detroit Fire Department, a time when in 1972, I was the 80th African American to join the fire department. The first two joined the department back in 1936. So it wasn't from 1936 to 1951 did another African American join the fire department. So from 1951 to 1972, the remainder, that's 79 firefighters, joined the department. Well, during that very early time, many, many days would transpire on 24-hour shift where I would never see another African American firefighter, for good reason. There were 72 fire companies in the city. There was only 80 of us. And some of those had moved to other divisions, so there wasn't 80 anymore, and some had come and gone. So during that time, it was turbulent. So from 1972 to 1974, when Coleman Young became mayor, only a handful of African American firefighters joined the department. But in 1974, during Coleman's campaign, he spoke truth to power as it related to what the police and fire department would look like under his leadership. Of course, as a firefighter in a very small group, we were excited by just the idea that here this African American powerhouse will take the initiative to change two of the most integrated, segregated organizations in this city, two of the most racist organizations in this city, and create a whole new value system for the people of the city of Detroit. So in 1974, shortly after he was elected, he determined that anyone who worked for the city in any department that wanted to take on the challenge of being firefighters in the city of Detroit could transfer, competing through the department's challenges, doing all of the things necessary, but all of them had access. Well, a tremendous number of people from DPW, from DOT, from all of the city departments decided what a great opportunity to integrate into what they knew was a tremendous opportunity. It was an economic opportunity. It was a great career path. It was an opportunity for them to work in a job that didn't work every day, but allowed you to work in so many different venues. So the department grew. In 1976, I became the president of the Phoenix Black Firefighters. During that time, it was very critical. The department was being challenged in so many different ways. The seniority system in the Detroit Fire Department was strictly by seniority. As a consequence of that seniority, there were no African American officers in the department. 1976, myself and a gentleman named Ben Driscoll, who has since passed on, decided that we would file a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit in the city of Detroit, that would declare disparate impact of hiring for the rationale for why there were no officers in the Detroit Fire Department. Well, in 1976, guess what happened in federal court? We lost. But we didn't give up. Unfortunately, my partner in that lawsuit struggled with the pressure that was applied to each of us, struggled in such a way that in a very short time he ended up leaving the department and ultimately passing away. The stress of what happened during that period was unbelievable. It made me stronger. It put me in the mindset of the guy who I knew was changing the way the city of Detroit would ultimately look, Coleman Young. I garnered strength and power from his leadership. In 1978, New Detroit Incorporated, along with the Phoenix Black Firefighters, teamed up to file a lawsuit and initiate a ballot initiative back in 1978 that would change the promotion system in the Detroit Fire Department to a knowledge, skills, and ability base. Walt Douglas, at the time, was the president of New Detroit. we worked together to gather unbelievable team of people from really unprecedented positions in Detroit labor movement who decided that they would support a challenge to seniority, which was the basis in so many cases for every single job promotion that existed in this city. But they stepped up, and we passed a ballot initiative in 1978. That ballot initiative was passed by the city of Detroit because people realized how important it was to begin to see African American leadership in the front seat of those fire trucks. Well, the same firefighters union that fought us tooth and nail throughout this whole process took us to court, and the judge decided that the vote of the people didn't matter, that the union contract superseded anything that could happen. So it remained business as usual. During that time, of course, I was being challenged in so many different ways in the department. All kinds of threats, all kinds of death threats, all kinds of situations that, for the most part, I thought that there was no place to go. But time had proven that all of these new black firefighters were the strength that I needed, that we needed, to turn this thing around. So as I responded to firefighters and to fires in many instances, knowing that so many of these people who had sent these death threats were riding behind me in the truck or behind me on the fire hose, but these brothers coalesced behind me, supported me, ensured my safety for the next couple of years, and then I left the firefighting division and I moved into administration. And again, it was because of the struggles that I was having. The commissioner, who was the first African American to be appointed fire commissioner by Coleman back in 1974, decided that, look, there's too much turmoil, too many challenges. You need to come downtown and work with me. So I did. So in 1980, I started a whole new look at what the fire service could be and what it could mean to the citizens of this great city. So in 1980, I'm working as a driver for the fire commissioner. And I'm very proud. I'm wearing my blue uniform and I'm wearing it and it looks great, and I'm representing African American firefighters. The commissioner, who was an African American but looked white. And for those of you who were around, many of you knew Mel Jefferson, and he looked white. He wasn't white. He was a real brother. He loved black people like I love black people. So he took me under his wing, and on many occasions, because of his relationship with Mayor Young, there would be events and opportunities where they would go, the mayor and the fire commissioner would go to Max Fisher's home, to Henry Ford's home, and I would drive the fire commissioner to those meetings. The first time I walked into the meeting at Henry Ford's house, now here I am, this little black boy, Max Fisher, Henry Ford, you name them, they're in the room. So I walk in, and I decide that I'm going to go and sit in the hallway. Coleman says, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to go sit out here." "No, you sit here because the lessons you'll learn today are those lessons that you will never, ever forget." So on many, many occasions, I had the opportunity to do that, to sit in the room with some of the most powerful people, not just in Detroit, but in America. And I learned because I sat and I listened, which is part of this whole storyteller experience. Listening to a story, listening to people who brokered some of the most powerful decisions that this community would deal with over the next 20 years. Shortly after, Fire Commissioner made some decisions along with the mayor that because there were no African American officers in the fire department, we needed to put a layer in that would change the direction so that not only did the commissioner have influence, but there were others who would have influence in the fire department. At that time, the commissioner appointed 4 of us, and they named us administrative assistants. And a very good friend of mine, Quentin Watkins, his wife is here tonight. But they named us administrative assistants with all of us different roles and responsibilities in changing the way leadership looked in the fire department. We did exactly that. With the spirit that each one of us had, the directions that each one of us were given, EMS, fire suppression, you name it. We had roles and responsibilities in those places that were unprecedented, that gave rise to so many different concerns of white firefighters who never ever thought that they would experience these kinds of transitional periods. So we moved on, and we continued to make progress. The seniority system never changed. It continued to be seniority only. So here I am, 38-year-old African-American man, managing white captains and lieutenants and battalion chiefs who in many cases were twice my age. Resentful? Go figure. Impatient? Go figure. Disrespectful? Absolutely. As long as, and to the point where we would not allow disrespect, we began to change the face of the Detroit Fire Department. As time went on, African Americans gained seniority and began to get promoted to the next highest rank. So we began to see what that transition was all about. In 1990, I got a call from the mayor's office, from Charlie Williams, who was the mayor's top guy, a great friend of mine and a great supporter. And he said, the fire commissioner is going to, the mayor is going to appoint you to deputy fire commissioner, the first African American ever to serve in that position. Was I excited? Of course I was. Was I frightened by the power and authority that went with it and the lack of understanding of how do I make this thing work? Well, I could reflect on one guy who brought me there, Coleman Alexander Young, who sat in the room with Max Fisher and Henry Ford and commanded their attention, insisted upon their input, insisted upon them being a part of the revitalization of this city of Detroit. I learned from that. I sat in that room and I was able to pull the strength and the power and then transfer that into the leadership roles that I was given. So one day, we are in the middle of Devil's Night, and I'm sure you all remember. Devil's Night, 1984, 784 fires, the most in the history of the fire department, probably anywhere in the country. I'm sitting in the office. Fires are out of control. We have no more fire companies to respond. The mayor is at an event across the street at Cobo Hall. The commissioner says, Marvin, go across the street and let the mayor know that fires are out of control and the city is on fire. Well, for those of you who knew the mayor, now that I've been cleared to cuss, He said, "What the fuck are you talking about?" I said, "Mr. Mayor, we have no additional fire companies to respond." Well, he never really trusted the fire department because the union just continued to fight him tooth and nail about everything. So he didn't trust the fire department. So at the time he said, "Chief Bannon, go get in the helicopter and go see what the hell's going on." So I go back to fire headquarters and we continue to try to maneuver to try to get these fires out. And Bannon finally comes back and he says to the mayor, "The city is burning and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it." That was my first active, aggressive experience with Coleman Young. So we go back and we're at Cobo Hall and he had not left yet and he said, "Look, what are we going to do? We've got all of the companies, we need to call people back." The mayor says, "Fucking firemen are not going to do what they're supposed to do." We get through this, and then we continue to plan for years and years to come. And you all remember, year after year, people from all over the world would come to take pictures of Detroit burning. It was a turbulent time in our city. But Mayor Young put together a task force of people that still, to this day, they changed the name to Angels Night, but it had the Devil's Night response. And today, it appears as though coming up this October, Devil's Night, Angels Night has gone away. I can only say that I left the fire department now 25 years ago. But to this very day, Coleman Young continues to inject himself in my life. I am the president of the Coleman Young Foundation and have been for the last 8 years. And we have educated. We have sent to college over 500 students, all in his name. So my salute to the Honorable Coleman A. Young is power to the people. Thank you all.